Tomorrow's October. You're excited? I'm excited. You know, nothing screams October like 103 degrees on Wednesday, right? I know. I saw the weather and I was like, oh, come on. And when it's over 100, we have to cancel sports, which is so sad. I get a break on Wednesdays. It's gonna be too hot. I'm like, no, I feel so bad, but it's so warm. I think it feels weird that it's so hot when it's like almost Halloween. We're getting there. It's officially almost October tomorrow. Very exciting. I got all my lights put up, so I'm feeling very accomplished. It's walk to school day for my little ones on Wednesday, and they all walk up our street. And so my kids were like, you have to put up, I do like a big tunnel that they walk through and it's all lit up. And so we spent like all weekend putting up this tunnel. So I feel very accomplished going into this week because the tunnel's up. Right? It was like my life goal, right? Get the tunnel. So very happy about it. So it's covered with spiders. I hate spiders. Like, and I put spiders everywhere. I don't know why I did that to myself. Facing my fear. Anyway, I had another thought, but it left me. Maybe it'll come out. We'll see. So I put that up there. I want to remind you of the homework assignment. Several of you have actually turned it in already, which is fantastic. You could turn it in early, obviously. But remember that first homework assignment is due by tonight at 11:59 p.m. You're turning it in on Canvas. You're only picking one. I had a couple of people email me to ask. Remember, you're only picking one option, and then you'll pick a different option for the one in November. So there's two of them in total. I hope that you chose something fun. I look forward to what you wrote and what you went to and all that kind of stuff. And again, if you didn't have time to do something a little more elaborate, remember you get another shot at it in November. Are there any questions about the homework assignment? Anything unclear about or need a little bit more at all? All right. So we'll jump back into orientation. We spent a ton of time, obviously last time, talking about, how do we decide what somebody's orientation is? And then we ended with looking at, the fact that we still don't know what causes somebody's orientation. So what we'll look at today are some statistics, some policies and legislation, and some of the effects that can have coming out, and a few other things related to orientation. And we don't have accurate statistics when it comes to orientation, right? What are some reasons why we might not have accurate statistics about the breakdown of orientation in our culture? I can think of a few reasons why. Why might we not know? Yeah. People lie. People lie. Great, right? That's possible. Not great, but yes, great to answer. It's true. People might lie. Volunteer bias. Okay. Volunteer bias, for so people who are willing to respond. Maybe that's a different population. What else? What other reasons why we might not have an accurate number? Any thoughts? Think about your research when you went out. Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's a big part of it. We talked a lot about that last time, right? How it can be very fluid. If somebody doesn't fit neatly into a box, they might not know which ones are going for it. Do you have thoughts there? They might not know, right? Remember when you went out, some of you came back and you were like, they didn't know what orientation was. They thought it was gender, right? People might not know what their orientation is. Yeah. Sure, right? Cultural beliefs might affect it. There's a ton of reasons why this might not be accurate. But the popular opinion is that 1 in 10 people tend to identify as gay or lesbian. That goes up quite a bit if you include bisexuality. 3 to 4% in women, 2 to 3% in men. But popular opinion is 1 in 10, right? When we talk about identifying as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. And as people who identify as a minority group, any minority group is going to have a struggle. Right. And here we're talking about orientation. So people who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or even asexual, people who aren't heterosexual, tend to struggle a little bit with societal attitudes, maybe legislation. There's a lot of legislation stuff that has come up in the last year or two related to orientation. And so we'll look at some examples of that. And some are newer and some are older, but important to be aware of. And when we talk about facing marginalization, prejudice, or negative attitudes, the kind of blanket term that we might use is homophobia, right? So homophobia would be an irrational fear of somebody who identifies as homosexual. So gay or lesbian, it could be bisexual, could even be asexual. We could include that as well. It could also be a fear of like toward yourself. You can have what's called internalized homophobia, where you are like afraid of or disgusted by your own sexuality. That can happen, or it can be directed toward other people. And that tends to be the way that it kind of manifests. I have some statistics. They're about 5 years old. This is like pre-COVID. But in 2019, about almost 1,300 gay and lesbian individuals were victims of hate crimes in the United States, which resulted in either death or serious injury. So bullying, being attacked, right, being murdered, right, violent crimes that resulted in death or serious injury. And this is from like national statistics, again, about 5 years old. But hate crimes, here we're talking about being directed at someone who identifies as gay or lesbian, might involve violence, intimidation, vandalism, something where you're being targeted as a result of your affiliation with being part of like a homosexual or bisexual identity. And this is something that has definitely gotten quite a bit better in our culture, but it's still something that is very much there, whether it's being teased or being attacked or like some kind of purposeful targeting because of your orientation. And again, lots of examples of this. I tried to pick just a few in a kind of a range. And some of these are newer and some of them are a little bit older. But if you look at like probably the biggest one that was recent was the Pulse nightclub in Florida, right? And this was a big incident that happened in 2019, I believe it was, where 50 people were killed at a gay club in Florida as an act of like a hate crime related to homophobia, right? And so we see these happen on the smaller scale. This was like on a bigger scale. And then we see another really kind of current thing, the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida is probably one of the most current pieces of legislation. This was proposed in Florida and 12 other states. The bill details a bunch of different things, but you can't discuss anything related to orientation or gender in school. So anything related to gender orientation or sexuality in school is completely banned. And it's a very much like a trans and homophobic bill. 12 different states, again, had it proposed. And then I have a couple examples of maybe, I don't know if we'll say lesser, but different, more like companies that are very outspoken against gay rights. Berea Pasta Company said that they would never do an advertisement with a homosexual family. If the gays don't like it, they can go eat another brand. That was 2013, a little bit older. I don't know if any of you remember this one. Chick-fil-A is very, very anti-gay rights. It's a very like religiously owned company. But in 2012, they had a day where every cent that they made went directly to fight gay and lesbian rights. And so what was interesting is they advertised this quite a bit. And on that day, and I wrote it down, they had 367 more customers than average per store nationwide. So a lot of people lined up and went to this. And I remember I lived in the Valley at the time, and there's that Chick-fil-A on like Tampa or something right there, like kind of near the mall. And I remember driving by it, and there were like all these people in line. And I was like, what did I miss? What's happening at the chicken place today, right? Like I've actually never eaten at Chick-fil-A, but I drove by it and I saw it. And then I remember reading about it later. Every penny that was raised that day went to fighting gay rights. And then they had an interesting reaction. The next day was a national kiss-in that was organized by a gay and lesbian organization, where they encouraged anyone who identified as gay, lesbian, or bisexual to go to Chick-fil-A and make out in the store to raise awareness, which is kind of a funny response. But you see these things kind of across the country, whether they're actual acts of violence or more like political, in the like bills that are passed or companies, right? There's a lot of this kind of stuff in our culture, again, kind of all over the place in terms of severity. But anything that is targeting a particular group here, based on their orientation, we would consider like homophobia. Any thoughts, comments, stories, questions, anything so far? This one's old, but I want you to be aware of it because it's something that was popular for many years. Up until 2003, our nation had what were called sodomy laws. Right now, the term sodomy comes from the idea of like Sodom and Gomorrah, kind of like unholy cities coming out of the Bible, cities driven by like lust and like wickedness, if you will. But a sodomy law is a law that details sexual acts as sex crimes. So you could be sent to jail or fined up to $10,000 if you were caught committing an act of sodomy. Traditionally, sodomy refers to like anal sex between two men, but it could be any sex act that doesn't lead to procreation if you look at like the broad definition of it. So up until 2003, the red states, the states that are red up here, you would be sent to jail if you were caught having sex with a same-sex partner. Now you might ask yourself, how would you be caught having sex with a same-sex partner? Technically, these would also apply to heterosexual couples as well, but they were almost never enforced. So what happened is neighbors would report their like neighbors for being in a same-sex relationship, and then the police would show up and arrest them for engaging in acts of sodomy. And so all the way up until 2003, 14 states in our country were still putting people into jail for same-sex like sex, like, and it could be enforced for anyone, but it was drastically more enforced for same-sex couples. So again, definitely long gone, but something that I think is something worth being aware of. One last thing here, in terms of legislation, this one's complicated. It's constantly changing, right? Same-sex marriage in our country has gone through an incredible number of like transitions and changes over time, right? So in 1996, the Defense of Marriage Act was passed. DOMA is what it became known as. And what this did is it protected marriage as only between a man and a woman, right? So this was a federal piece of legislation that passed in 1996. But the interesting thing is that states had their own right to decide. So every state had the ability to decide if they allowed same-sex, like civil unions, domestic partnerships, or whatever name they wanted to have for some legal protection. California, just since that's where we live, in 2008, passed a proposition called Prop 8. Prop 8, when it passed, allowed same-sex couples to get married in California and have legal protection. We are the only states to pass this and then take it back and then pass it again, right? So California passed this. People went out by the hundreds and got married legally, and then it was repealed and all those marriages were nullified. And then they passed it again a couple of years later and all those marriages were valid again. Only state to have that happen. In 2013, it was deemed unconstitutional, so marriages were allowed to resume. So like 5 years of kind of back and forth legislation. And then big one federally, in 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that state level bans on same-sex marriage were unconstitutional, right? So in 2015, it made it where you could get married in any state. You couldn't ban it. It was unconstitutional to do so. And then that was overturned again until the Respect for Marriage Act in 2022 was passed, that safeguarded same-sex marriage nationwide. So as it stands right now, if a couple is married a same-sex couple is married in California, that has to be recognized if the other state that they travel to or move to also recognizes marriage. It's really tricky for people who are married in a same-sex relationship, depending on which state you live in. But this was the idea here was to protect that in various states. So just something to be aware of. If you're not legally married to someone, your rights to them and your relationship are drastically hindered. So let's say you're in a same-sex relationship and you're not married, you could be denied hospital visitation rights. So let's say your partner of however many years was in an accident, the hospital could turn you away for not having a valid relationship with them. You can't file taxes together, right? Which is a big benefit. You can't be in charge of each other's healthcare decisions. So marriage gives a lot of protection to any relationship, and a very complicated history in our country about whether it's legal or illegal and where. So just something kind of along the lines of legislation. And so as it stands now, we're down here at the last one, but kind of back and forth for many, many years. When they made it legal, we went to the courthouse in Ventura and got legally married. And our daughter was 6 months old, and she was our witness. So cute. On our wedding certificate, it's got her little scribble as our witness, which is so cute, right? And it made like it was just a formality, but it was really cute that it's got her little like scribble on the bottom. Yeah.
2013 says Prop 8 was deemed unconstitutional, but same-sex marriage was allowed.
Yeah, so Prop 8, the idea of Prop 8, if you overturned Prop 8, then it allowed it, right? So Prop 8 actually came up twice. So the first time was in 2008, and when it passed, it made it legal. And then they reworded it the second time, and so it had to be overturned. Really confusing. And I think a lot of people, when they voted, weren't even sure what they were voting for. Because
voting on Prop 8 would say yes to being there.
Right. But not the first time, yes. The second time it had to be overturned because it was deemed unconstitutional that they banned it. So it was confusing. Yeah. It was really confusing. And I don't think that helped with some of like the voting stuff. Too. Other thoughts or questions, comments, anything else here? Okay. When it comes to mental health, right, up until 1973, so that's a long time ago now, right? Math people, what, that's 51 years, right? Is that correct? I had to add something the other day. My daughter was like, what's the answer? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not a math person. Their math is getting way too hard for me. I'm like, I don't know how to prime factor something. You'll never use that in your entire life. But anyway, I could go on, but I won't. But up until 1973, identifying as gay, lesbian, or bisexual was actually considered a mental illness that required treatment. Right? So if you identified in one of those ways, you were diagnosed with a mental illness and you needed what was called conversion or sexual reorientation therapy. And the idea was almost like we could flip a switch and make you straight if you were gay through different techniques that we would do, like shocking people, and trying to reorient them in some way. Now, we learned that this, one, didn't work, and two, it was deemed unconstitutional by the APA back like maybe 10, 12 years ago. And so this isn't something that's openly practiced anymore. But for a lot of years, if you identified that way, you would need therapy to try and change it. And what we also see is that just there's a lot of like depression and suicidality and marginalization that occurs for people who identify as any minority group, right? When you're in a minority, you oftentimes feel othered or left out, and it can lead to substance abuse or depression or suicidality. And again, therapy was geared at trying to change that by changing your orientation. Now what we do is help you deal with more like societal negativity rather than trying to change your identity. And what they would do to do this is they would traditionally with men, it was more highly practiced with men, they would hook a man's penis up to an instrument that would measure blood flow and if they got an erection. And then they would show them images of gay men, other men that were naked. And if they were turned on by it, they would shock that man as a way to try and reverse their orientation. Now, of course, it didn't work in the long run, but it was a very like commonly practiced thing for years. There was a whole movie kind of making fun of this. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie, But I'm a Cheerleader. But the whole movie is about like sexual reorientation therapy. I want to show you a little clip from it. But in this movie, they do like an intervention like you would have for substance abuse, almost. Like an intervention, her friends and boyfriend all like confront her to say that she's a lesbian. And then they send her away to a camp where they're going to reorient her. It doesn't work. They put a bunch of lesbians and gay men in a room alone together. And of course, other things happen. But it's a very like comical and yet a little bit sad movie. So I'll play you a clip from it. Again, they're kind of making fun of it more than any of this idea, but they go through this whole idea of conversion reorientation therapy where they have a little bit of like a, they're confronting, right? It's almost like there's like intervention that happens. And then at this camp that they go to for this 2-month program, it's a lot of these exercises to reorient them. And as you can see, everything's very gendered, a lot of connection between gender and orientation. So it's pretty hilarious. They take these group of like very flamboyant gay men and try to teach them to be real men and try to teach the women to be real women. And like, they all fall in love with each other along the way because they put them together. But it's kind of building off this idea. I wrote it up here if you were interested. And as I said, this was deemed ethical back, I think it was 2009 by the APA. But it was practiced for a lot of years, and it was often like a camp that people went away to. And the thought was that we could almost like flip that switch. And people sometimes did at the camp, but then they would often default back to their more traditional identity when they left. So this is more the norm now, but that was the norm for many, many years, especially prior to 1973 when it was considered a mental illness. Any thoughts, comments, questions, stories, anything before I keep going? Anything else? A couple of other things here. The extent to which somebody is open about their orientation, about their identity, can very significantly affect their life and their lifestyle, right? And so there's this whole idea of coming out, right? And coming out of the closet, the metaphor for coming out of the closet comes from the idea that you have skeletons in the closet, which means you're hiding something. So skeletons in the closet is a metaphor, meaning like you have something hidden away. So when you come out of the closet, you let the skeletons out, you come out with your identity and you're open about it. Now, we tend to have this thought that coming out is like a one-time grand gesture, that you have your like one moment where you come out of the closet and you come out to everyone. But it's actually like every single time that you meet a new person, you have to decide whether you're going to come out to them or not, right? And so it might be that you kind of come out to everyone at once, but it can also be something that every time you meet a new friend, a new coworker, right? Are you going to be honest or not about your identity? And it should be a choice that you make for yourself, not something that you ever do for somebody else. And again, it can have a lot of consequences. Do you have to lie? Do you have to try and pass? Very common thing for gay and lesbian individuals to do is to change pronouns, right? As a way to try and not have to come out. Kind of funny story. My partner teaches at Royal High School. And like in our house, I go by dad and husband, right? Like those are my roles in our house, just because they fit me, right? Like, and so my kids call me dad. I get Father's Day, my partner gets Mother's Day, right? And I'm husband. So she's always like, my husband, my husband, my husband, not lying. That's my role in our family. But her poor kids have no idea, right? She doesn't feel like it's safe to tell them. So she's always talking about her husband and they have no idea that that's me when I show up, which I think is funny because they start making fun of her husband and I'm like, I'm sitting right here, but that's okay. And so it's, again, it's almost a form, it is a form of passing, right? Like rather than being open about it because it doesn't feel safe to her, it's using different pronouns or kind of like skirting the truth in a way as a way to not have to be open and reveal something that could put you in danger of losing your job, danger of whatever, right? And so just to kind of illustrate this a little more, I have a little activity that I want to do. So you're going to need a piece of paper that you're going to turn into. It doesn't have to be a full piece of paper, but write your name on it, your first and last name, and then a piece of paper or half a piece of paper, whatever, that you're going to turn in to me when we're done. You can write your first and last name on it. So you can get the So on your piece of paper, what I want you to do, I want you to write down 5 or 6 things. So let's say 5 or 6 things that are really important to you in your life, right? Like big things in your life, right? So for me, I would probably say like my family, right? So my partner and my kids, the holidays, I love football. I probably write cake on there. Food, maybe more globally. But like, what are like 5 or 6 things that are kind of like big things in your life that are important to you in some way? And it can be anything from people to your pets to like foods to like your identity, whatever, 5 or 6 things that are big things in your life. And kind of overthink it, right? Like things that are big for you, things that come up pretty quickly. Give you another minute, and then I'll tell you what we're gonna do. There could be something that came up really quick, right? Like again, I thought about my partner, my kids, like food, sports, holidays, right? My pets, right? All of those things. So what I want you to do, I want you to find a partner. Ideally, somebody that you don't know, right? Somebody that you don't know very well, or maybe don't know at all. So go ahead and find a partner. I'll give you a second to do that. If you have to have 3, that'll work, but it's easier with 2. So find a partner. Again, somebody you don't know is ideal. And find a partner. And again, if you have a group of 3, that'll work. All right, everyone have a partner or partners? Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to each take like a minute, 1 to 2 minutes, and I want you to introduce yourself to this other person. Right, tell them a little bit about yourself, your name, if they don't know your name, but you can't mention anything that you wrote down on your list. Nothing that you wrote down. Okay, so I want you to tell them a little bit about your life and about yourself, your identity, personality, whatever. You can't share anything that you wrote down. Okay, and then when you're done, switch and the other person. Okay, so just like a minute, tell them a little bit, and then we can talk about it together. Go ahead when you're ready. And if you have 3 of you, just rotate. I'm just thinking.
I don't work, but I should. I'm just like thinking about that. I was like, I got at the dentist. I was like, I got like a bunch of It's like a small little package where you take
Let's bring it back to our big group so we can talk about it. Okay. All right. So I wanted you to ideally have somebody that you don't know well, because if you know someone well, that kind of allows you to cheat very easily. But was this easy to do? Was it difficult to do? I mean, if I couldn't talk about food, my family, sports, the weather, it's hot. I could talk about the weather. I could talk about my job. But like, if I couldn't talk about like the core things, like I'm not sure I could give the most, like the best description of who I am to someone else. Like, what was that like for you? Was it easy? Was it hard? What do you, any thoughts? Anyone cheat? You could totally cheat in a way. Yeah. Like thoughts? Yeah.
Like it started as something that was not on the list, and then it kind of like, oh, that's kind of on my list.
Maybe I can kind of like side skirt around it a little bit. Okay. I like that. Yeah.
I feel like I cheated a little bit because I feel like I said what was on my list, but in different words.
Yeah.
like, instead of like saying like, oh, like school is important to me, I was like, I'm a biology major, right? So
Yeah,
kind of in a different way.
found a way to get there,
Yeah.
but like kind of a little bit roundabout way of going. Anybody else? Other like just kind of general thoughts? Yeah,
I feel it wasn't much different for me, even if it had been from the list, because introducing myself and not
Sure.
myself is not something.
yeah, right. And you know, when we meet someone new, you might not be sharing a lot of that kind of stuff anyway, right? It might be very superficial anyway, especially if that's something that you're not like just naturally the kind of person to do. And so it might not be too bad if you just met this person. But what if you kept interacting with them and you couldn't tell them about anything on that list? Right. And that the reason I had to do that is to try to just give you a little bit of a parallel what it can be like for some people. Now, again, our world is definitely very different than maybe it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and whatnot. But oftentimes people have to decide, how open am I going to be? Right. And so it maybe you get there like in a roundabout way, or you change pronouns, or you just don't mention those things. But sometimes this can make it really hard. And people sometimes go through this as well with other types of relationships. It could be any relationship, but we're obviously talking about same-sex relationships here. Any other kind of general thoughts, comments, anything else about that? I'm going to collect them from you, maybe the easiest things to get, but you get rewarded for the fun things that were on your list. But again, the parallel here is that just oftentimes when people are identifying as gay or lesbian, if they don't feel safe, they might not be able to talk about everything in their life. And that, you know, kind of leads to this idea of how much do you ask versus how open are you. All right, if you want to guys pass this forward, and then some of you move, if you want to get on to your thoughts. All right, do I have everyone's? Okay. I'm gonna make sure I get those and give you your points. Okay. Away. All right, so a couple more things. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about bisexuality. And bisexuality, so I got into a debate about this with my 10-year-old yesterday. Like the one who I told you identified as bisexual, right? So we were having breakfast and she was talking about being bisexual, that she had a date with this girl. And I was like, what does that mean? Like out of curiosity, like I tried to be really like open about it. She was like, yeah, I went on a date with this girl. I'm like, when did you do that? You know, like you're 10, you're with me all weekend. And she's like, well, we had a lunch date. I'm like, at school? She's like, yeah. I was like, so what does a lunch date with this girl look like? She's like, well, we held hands. Okay. All right. I was like, and anything else? She's like, well, I mean, maybe. I was like, well, what do you mean maybe? And she's like, well, she kissed me on the cheek. I was like, you little floozy. You really So that was your date. She's like, yes, so we're both bisexual, and she's dated this person and I've dated this person. Apparently they've all dated each other. Lunch dates where they held hands. I'm like, okay, I'm all right with that. My 12-year-old still thinks love is gross, right? So I'll take that too, right? I'm still safe for a little while. I have 3 girls. I don't think I'm going to be safe much longer, especially with my one who identifies as bisexual and is trying to date people at lunchtime, right? Elementary, she's in 5th grade, right? Slow down, little one, slow down, right? But she's all like, so I identify as bisexual. And we're like, what does that mean for you? Like, and she's like, well, I like boys and girls. I was like, okay, well, that's true. And she's like, so I don't know, maybe I'm more like asexual. I'm like, no, bisexual, you had it right. Right. And we got in this debate, like bisexuality doesn't have like, according to her, it meant that you have to be 50-50. Right? 50% interest in each. And I was like, so you're 50-50. And she's like, well, it's really close to, it's like 40, which she said it's like 48-55. Okay. I was like, all right, I get it. Like, she's like, I'm close, but not quite there. You don't have to be 50-50 was my point. Like bisexuality traditionally means that you have an interest in either or both. It doesn't have to be both, but it could be either. Now, kind of a more popular term in some ways now, like sometimes we talk about like pansexuality, which kind of means more of like you're interested in the person more than like the sex, right? So it could be anybody depending on who they are, rather than worrying so much about like whether they're male or female or whatnot. Right, so it's interesting. There's a lot of varieties on this, and your textbook talks about 3 different types of bisexuality. They talk about sequential, contemporaneous, and situational. Right, situational. I'm thinking of our roommate, our college roommate that 10 years ago, the one time they sampled the what was it, beef and what? Beef and ham. I brought that up at dinner at home, right? Beef and ham, right? But we can be sequentially where you do one partner and then a different partner. Contemporaneous would be both at the same time, and situational might be due to a lack of choice, right? Like maybe you're in with a roommate or like in a same-sex school or whatnot. But as a orientation, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and stereotypes when it comes to bisexuality. So I want to give you just a minute and jot it down so you can share. But can you come up with any stereotypes of bisexuality? Like, what does it mean to be bisexual? Any stereotypes that you can come up with? So I'll give you just a moment. Find a couple of people around you. Any stereotypes you can think of, write them down so you can share, and then we'll talk about it together. And I have a couple up here just to help you start, but see what you can come up with.
Yeah, just saying. And feel free, you know, without that, I know.
Right? It's still out.
Yeah.
That's obnoxious. I don't like that.
It's weird, huh?
Yeah. Normally they fix that pretty quickly.
Good Verizon.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, yeah.
So give you just another minute again, whatever you can come up with.
Pretty. Maybe not, but even then, I feel, you know, I just want to wait until we use the word.
No, am I wrong?
I mean, I guess.
Right, let's get this together for a minute. I'm curious if you were able to come up with anything. Anyone willing to give me one? What's one stereotype of identifying as bisexual? Yeah. Okay, right, so it depends on who you're with, right? And how you're gonna be defined.
Yeah.
Okay.
Either one is the same person.
Right, right. I think that's a really good point and a really common stereotype. How about another one? Yeah.
It's very common for people to think that bi girls are just saying they're bi for interest.
Sure.
And I remember a quote and it said, it's stupid, but it's like bi girls and their boyfriends.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Yeah, right. I've heard that too. And oftentimes there's like an element of like trendiness to it, right? Or it's just like a popular thing to say, but whether or not it's an identity or not is sometimes a question, right? You had your hand up too, yeah?
Like, seeing this like stepping stone.
Sure. Mhm.
That's the kind of thing that's like taking aside.
Yeah,
Taking aside.
sure. Right, as if bisexuality couldn't be the side that you picked, right? Like you have to pick a side, or like it's a stepping stone, or that's your true identity. You're just in denial about it, right? Like all of those kind of going together. Yeah.
One that I pointed out that I really liked as well was like, say, women were saying, and, you know, women is more, you know, masculine presenting and everything. Like, oh, just might as well be straight because the person is so masculine presenting.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I've heard that one quite a bit as well. Other things, yeah.
I've heard this happen a couple of times, but I had a conversation with my mom about this, and she was like, no, like, I've been really attracted to women before. It's totally like, I'm straight. I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't know.
You're like, I don't know, mom.
Same experience, specifically with their mom.
Okay,
So,
yeah. Interesting, right? And I mean, and it could be, again, how you define your own identity is what matters. And so for your mom, it could be, oh yeah, I was totally attracted to them. I never did anything that you know of, right? Right, just to plant the little bomb for you, right? I never did anything about it, so it doesn't count, right? And we kind of talked about that too, right? Interesting, right? I've been really attracted to, but no, I'm straight. Okay, yeah,
That your bisexuality isn't valid if you want to, it's.
sure. Right, and you could be bisexual but not have had a partner of one of the like options, right? Like it could very much be that you haven't had a boyfriend or girlfriend, but you kind of know that you're open to it, right? That's another one. There's one other really big one, right? Anyone? Yeah,
you're going to cheat on me?
yeah, that you're not able to stay committed, right? The lack of monogamy is probably the biggest stereotype that I see, or like that you hear of, that if you're bisexual, it just means you want to have sex with everyone all the time and you're not able to commit, right? Which could be the case for anyone, right? Regardless of which orientation they are. But that's often portrayed in the media of like, oh, you just want to have sex with everybody all the time, and you aren't capable of any kind of like commitment or monogamy, or that you're just confused. You know, that you're promiscuous is another one that comes up a lot. Any other like thoughts that came up? I don't want to steal it if you have one. Anything else that you thought of was bisexuality? Yeah.
Can't decide who you want to be with.
Yeah, right. You just can't make up your mind, right? You want it all is another one, right? I think that's true of my daughter. She wants it all. She wants everything in life, right? Which that's fine with me. But yeah, that's a really common one. Sometimes using like you're a fence sitter, right? You can't choose a side, right? You're sitting on the fence and you could go on either side of it, depending it's not a real orientation, that you're in denial about your homosexuality, which we talked about as well. There's a lot of stereotypes, and you see them in the media a lot. You know, of like that lack of monogamy really being one that's portrayed pretty assertively. But a lot of stereotypes and discrimination, this can be a challenging orientation sometimes for people because of the invisibility that can sometimes come with it, right? And so, for example, there's often a lot of like groups that target like gay and lesbian individuals, like support groups, social groups, or whatnot. And sometimes people who identify as bisexual aren't as welcome in those groups, right? And so it's like you don't fit into the heterosexual population, but you don't fit into the gay population, and you become this individual, like invisible, marginalized group, right? Where it might be hard to meet other people who are bisexual because you're not welcome in either category. So sometimes this identity can come with its own challenges, even though it's very common. A lot of people, especially if we go with Kinsey and his scale, a lot of people technically identify as like bisexual, but we tend to have a lot of misunderstanding of this specifically. Yeah.
And like a lot of people really like that in head until they actually see the sit there.
Okay.
Like I have a friend that like she says that she's bisexual, but she has a boyfriend. So like friends, family, whatever, like they're just like, oh,
Yeah.
say
It's a
but
phase.
I feel like the second she ever had a girlfriend, then it's like, what the heck, like
Okay.
it's like I've been. So I
Mhm.
feel like probably like parents and like they see you be able to see them and
Sure. Yeah, right, even though they maybe have been open about being bisexual the whole time, but it's like, oh, well, you're with an opposite sex partner, so we're not worried about it. Sure. Mhm.
there really is a chance they would be
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that, right? And that's very true oftentimes as well. Any other thoughts, comments, anything else? So, obviously with the homework assignment, so I had somebody, the reason I'm referencing it, I had somebody a couple of years ago, what they turned in was, 2 songs, right? So what they did instead of movie clips, they wanted to do songs related to identifying as gay or lesbian. And they gave me, 2 very different songs. I'm sure a lot of you have heard both of them. But I'd like to kind of end with those songs because I think that they, capture a lot of different elements of what we've been talking about. So one of them, the first one we'll listen to is Take Me to Church, which is a little bit harder to watch. So just a little bit of like a trigger warning. There's a lot of violence that is related to the song. It's all about homophobia, which you may or may not have known. And then the second one is Same Love, which is a very like positive ending. So we'll start with the harder one. I just want to put that out there. But I'm going to play these 2 songs and the videos that go with them for you, just as kind of a way to like conclude this topic. And then we can talk about, any.
obviously like hard to watch. That was like very sad.
Well, like, I was like, exactly, it's like, get those songs, like, I was talking about, it's like, yeah, Sammy Church is kind of like, the opposite, for like, Sammy, like, more. And everything says, kind of like, I think the internalized as well, like, extra, like, it can definitely, like, that's definitely sorry. I think. Oh, it's fine, it's fine. I think girls kind of like give up what being. Yeah, so it's actually happens as well. It's like, the fear of.
All right, so in the interest of time, let's bring it back, but I just wanted to give you a second if you had any thoughts that kind of popped up as you were watching this. And I heard a couple of people say, I've heard that song a bunch of times, but I didn't know, I'd never seen the video. And I will say the same, I had heard that song so many times, right? Like I really like that artist, but I hadn't seen the video until they sent it to me as part of this. It was like, oh wow, that's a completely different meaning to me now. I can't hear that song without seeing the video. And then looking it up and trying to understand that metaphor of what he was going for, of talking about falling in love with somebody regardless of their sex or gender, as a metaphor to the church, right? And that like purity and intensity that can come with it. Really interesting. Again, years back, I hadn't seen the video either. But as a side note, if you're interested, that wasn't one of the options for the homework assignment. Right? If you would rather do songs than movies, that's always fine as well, right? Just to throw that out there. So don't forget between now and basically midnight tonight to turn in that homework assignment. It is due by this evening. I accept these late, but it's 10% off each day, which is like 2.5 points. So try and get it in before the deadline. But if you miss it, you can still turn it in on campus like tomorrow or the next day. There's a few points, but that's obviously better than nothing. When I see you next, we will move to chapter 3. So kind of out of order, but communication. So we'll do chapters 3 and 7, which is communication and love, which will be kind of fun, a lot of gendered stereotypes in there for us to explore as well. So have a wonderful rest of the day. Don't forget the homework, and I'll see you on Wednesday.